3 diesel trucks were parked across my driveway like they owned the street. A dump truck, a skid steer, and a flatbed trailer. And the woman in charge of our neighborhood was standing there smiling, like she'd just won something I hadn't known I was competing for. I remember tasting diesel in the air and realizing in a weird, calm way that someone had decided to turn my life into a slow-moving chokehold. If you think that's dramatic, hang on. You haven't heard the part about the $18,000 worth of tools trapped behind a garage door that wouldn't open. I've been an electrician my whole adult life. Hospitals, schools, dental offices, half the homes on this side of the county. When wire's short, you don't scream, you trace. You find the fault and you fix it. So standing in my driveway that morning, looking at heavy machinery idling on my property, I did what I always do. I diagnosed. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The dump truck blocked the mouth of the driveway, the skid steer's bucket sat inches from the steel garage door, and the trailer sealed the exit behind them like a barricade. The smell of diesel hung so heavy it had texture. Karen, the HOA president, stood with a clipboard all polished and pleasant, calling it temporary staging under emergency authority. Emergency. There was no fire, no flood, no exposed wiring. Just my garage, my tools, and her idea of power. I walked into the side door and closed it behind me. The main door was already pinned. The bucket was so close the opener couldn't lift the door an inch. I reached up, pulled the red emergency release cord, heard the motor disengage a hollow clunk, and then slid the manual deadbolt through the rail. The door became immovable. From outside, Karen's voice shifted. "Mr. Smith, what are you doing?" she asked. I flipped the breaker to the opener system. Dark, silent, dead. I locked the side door. Click. I called the sheriff. But this didn't start that morning. To understand why someone would park heavy equipment on my property without asking, you have to go back 6 months back to when I bought that house after my divorce, back to why the garage mattered so much. I didn't buy the house because it had curb appeal. I bought it for the garage, wide, deep, solid concrete room for my van, my benches, and the order I needed when everything else felt messy. After 20 years of marriage, half a life split and rearranged silence isn't peaceful, it's loud. That garage gave me steady. I rebuilt my workshop from scratch, tools lined up like instruments, cords wrapped, bins labeled. Order matters when the rest of your world doesn't. My daughter Riley understood. She was 15 then, curious and steady in that way teenagers get around their parents' hobbies. She'd sit on an overturned bucket while I sorted parts, asking questions about breakers and outlets like she was studying for a test. Why does this one trip, she'd ask, holding a GFCI? Because it protects people, I'd tell her. It senses danger before you do. She liked that. It made the work feel like something honest. The big job, the medical complex renovation, was the kind of contract that keeps you afloat. Everything I needed was behind that steel door. So when the first violation notice landed on my front step, thick on heavy paper with an embossed seal, I felt a cold shift. It wasn't a friendly suggestion. It was a demand. Your current front yard installation disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the community, it read. Remove non-conforming vegetation within 10 days. Native poppies and lupines were suddenly a threat. I called Karen. She answered smooth-clipped. Which ordinance, I asked. There was a pause. The board has determined your landscaping fails to meet standards, she said. When I pushed for a section number, she cooled. I don't appreciate your implication, Mr. Smith. And then she hung up. That was when I understood this wasn't about flowers. It was about control. Karen had been president for years. Not loud, not messy, polished. Blazers jewelry that caught the sun, a precise driveway, a white sedan, parked as if measured with a ruler. She smiled as she passed you on the sidewalk. The next morning she mailed you a violation. Mailbox 1 shade off violation. Holiday lights on January 3rd violation. Work van parked overnight violation. The bylaws were written vague, as most of them are, and she specialized in interpretation. Little refinements to the rules expanded authority like a shadow growing under the door. I tried to let it go. Most neighbors do. They repaint, trim, move a vehicle, pay the fine. Peace is easier than a fight. But I wasn't going to rip out native plants I planted with Riley's help. And when I didn't bow, Karen escalated. She started showing up with a camera documenting my driveway like she was building a case. Click, click, click. When I looked, she'd lower the camera and smile politely. Just ensuring compliance, she'd call. Then the notices multiplied. Unauthorized commercial vehicle storage despite my van being a standard trade van. I installed security cameras. Evidence beats emotion. I started a log dates times photos. I found patterns. Mrs. Garcia had a landscaping truck overnight 3 times that week with no notice. The Patels had a trailer with no notice. Selective enforcement is easy to prove if you record it patiently. But Karen had another lever she could weaponize the system. One Tuesday, I came home to a county inspector in my driveway. We received a complaint about unlicensed commercial operations, he said. I showed him permits, licenses, safety docs. Everything checked out. Between you and me, he lowered his voice. This address has been called in 4 times this week. Obsession, not concern. The equipment on the street moved closer. First a landscaping trailer by the entrance sign, then a skid steer 3 houses down, then a dump truck. Engines idled like a reminder we're here. I started connecting dots. Danny Karen's nephew ran the landscaping company that had won the HOA contract without clear competitive bidding. Legal fees in the HOA budget had jumped. Emergency authority was invoked more often. The same families who questioned the president received violation notices. Pressure repeated and escalating, making life inconvenient until people gave in. If that failed, escalate again. And escalate she did. One morning, an email arrived, urgent potential electrical hazard, an anonymous report of a burning odor in my garage invoking emergency clauses. By the time I returned from a small job, 3 diesel machines were parked on my driveway. A locksmith had been called earlier. They popped the mechanism and positioned equipment outside. No entry, just blockade. I tried the opener, nothing. The trucks had been sitting there precise and obstinate for days. I could have yelled. I could have started a Twitter war, except this was my life, not a headline. I had a contract starting in less than a week and $18,000 in tools inside. If I couldn't get to them, I couldn't work. If I couldn't work, I couldn't pay the mortgage. But when something shorts out, you don't panic, you trace the circuit. You map the current. The pattern widened. More neighbors came forward, violation notices piling up for those who had sat at an informal coffee a few weeks earlier. People started talking. Ree Patel, a quiet software engineer, mentioned a clause buried deep in the charter section. 12, the board president can be removed by a majority petition of homeowners, 51%. No cause required. 132 households meant 67 signatures. I looked at the trucks outside my driveway and felt the math change. Karen tried to tighten the wire. She filed a petition in county court alleging harassment and intimidation, and a deputy served me a temporary restraining order that prevented me from being within 100 feet of her house. The geography of the restriction cut the neighborhood in half. Door-to-door petitioning became risky. That was her move, isolate the troublemaker. But she assumed I was the only one who cared. She'd miscalculated. The restraining order applied to me, not to the rest of the neighborhood. They came to my garage. We spread documents over my workbench, violation notices, invoices, budget lines, pictures. Garages are good places for plans. They are workspaces, war rooms. Ree and Jake and Mrs. Rodriguez stepped into the role no one had expected them to play, organizers. They went door to door where I couldn't. They spoke softly, presented facts, and gathered signatures. Evidence beats rhetoric, every selective enforcement note, every unexplained contract increase, every emergency invoked without paperwork. Petitions arrived in batches 32, 47, 60. The Petersons quietly withdrew their complaint after admitting they'd been offered relief on back dues for their statement. By the end of the week, we had 74 signatures, more than the 67 needed. Karen had tried to cut the wire. She'd only rerouted the current. Timing was next, a bit like waiting for the exact second to flip a breaker. The restraining order expired at noon on a Friday. The trucks had been there for 14 days. The bylaws allowed unauthorized commercial equipment on a lot for 4 hours without written consent. I stood in the garage at 12:01 p.m., felt the concrete under my boots, and walked out. Karen stood on the sidewalk like sun on a coin clipboard in hand, the white sedan parked as always. She asked for cooperation. I walked back inside the garage, disengaged. The opener slid the deadbolt pin back into place, flipped the breaker, locked the side door, and called the sheriff. Deputy Martinez arrived, looked at the alignment of the trucks, and asked if I'd given permission. I said no. He asked Karen for documentation. She cited emergency authority. He asked how long the equipment had been there. 14 days, I answered. He raised an eyebrow. Ree stepped forward with a folder 74 signatures requesting removal of the HOA president. A county code enforcement vehicle pulled up. We received a report regarding an unpermitted conversion at your address, the inspector told Karen, and you could literally see the color drain from her face. Towing trucks came. One by one, the skid steer, the dump truck, the trailer were hauled off my driveway. The engine stopped. The neighborhood breathed. Order returned quietly. The garage door rose smoothly. My tools were exactly where I left them. Karen resigned 3 days later, an email citing personal reasons, no fanfare. The board initiated financial reviews. The landscaping contract was suspended pending audit. The emergency clause was rewritten to require full board documentation within 24 hours. Nothing flashy, no dramatic courtroom scene, just paperwork, and that's what made it durable. The lesson landed slowly, like the click of a breaker snapping back into place. Power can be loud and polished, but it can also be narrow. Real lasting power comes from participation, from neighbors doing their homework and signing their names. When one person fights, it looks personal. When 74 households sign a petition, it looks systemic. This whole ugly arc, the trucks, the restraining order, the diesel smell, it wasn't about flowers or a parked van. It was about limits. Limits on how far someone can stretch a vague rule before the fabric tears. Riley still helps on Saturdays. She's taller now, more confident, and sometimes she labels a bin or asks, "Did you know you were going to win?" I tell her no, I knew we'd try. The garage became what it always was, a place to fix things. Neighbors started planting native flowers quietly, not out of protest, but because it finally felt safe to make a choice. Mrs. Rodriguez added a row of blooms. The Patels swapped a patch of turf for drought-tolerant plants. Mr. Thompson planted a small patch by his mailbox. When the last truck left, it wasn't a sheriff's badge or a loud speech that ended it, it was signatures. 74 households, saying the rules apply to everyone, even the woman with the clipboard. So if you're ever faced with a slow legal smother document, gather evidence, find the clause that matters, and get people to participate. When something shorts out, you don't panic. You trace the circuit, you fix what's broken, and you make sure the power flows the way it should. What would you have done if your driveway was the battlefield? Fight alone or get your neighbors to sign? Tell me which feels more like justice to you. And if you've ever stood up to an overreach like that, share what happened. I want to hear it.